Voila. Okay. I decided that we'll do this week and next week to finish up the Sacraments. Originally, I was kind of debating, but Sunday the kids are still going to have Sunday school next week. Next Sunday is Palm Sunday, so we're going to do the procession of the palms and all that jazz. And I know Jamie's got a fun project to do with the kids, so the kids are going to be here. We might as well be here. Plus, we got a couple of weeks that we didn't have class, and I can talk about communion for 2 weeks anyhow. So voila. Um, Next Sunday. Nothing on Easter. Easter is just Easter. The topic that we're going to cover post-Easter, and I haven't decided whether we'll start the Sunday after or we'll take another Sunday off, is we're going to do hospitality. I've got, I can't remember, have we talked about that before, or has it always kind of been a tangent issue? I don't think I've done a class on hospitality. So what we're going to talk about effectively is the ancient kind of like Mesopotamian, Near Eastern concept of hospitality, and how that understanding is really it's a very important through line in understanding Scripture, especially the Old Testament, especially the Hebrew Bible. So what we're going to do is I've got some great resources for my professor friends. We're going to do kind of an overview of the concept of hospitality as it existed in the ancient world. And as always, we're going to do a kind of a contrast where it's kind of like, the ancient world and modern world. We can talk about some of the corollaries there. I'll just use red, don't worry about it. And then we'll go and we'll start looking through and applying some of those understandings to some specific texts in the Hebrew Bible, also in the New Testament as well. I'm debating which text to pick, because one of the things about hospitality texts in the Old Testament is a lot of them turn violent, because where it comes up usually is when this really important understanding of hospitality falls through, and the consequences of that. So we're talking about like Sodom and Gomorrah, Judges 19, stories like that. And or hospitality is used as a weapon by women, usually in the Hebrew Bible, in order to claim what power they do have. So like one of my favorite stories is the story of Jael and the tent peg, which is we'll save it for the study. But yeah. Oh, cool. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. Women in the Bible. All right. Do you know? Is it through? It's not. Well, it's not History Channel. Is it? Okay. This is how much I know about TV. Sure. Sure. Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah. I mean, quick tangent. One of my favorite courses that I took in seminary was a book on women in the Bible, and it was called Heroines, Harlots, and Helpmates. Talking about the roles that women tend to play in the Old Testament, and how there's a lot of ambiguity between that. Because, for example, one of the women I was just thinking of, Rahab or Rahav, from the book of Joshua, right? So this is Joshua sends his spies into the city, and they end up hooking up with this lady who, depending on the translation, is described either as a merchant or as a prostitute, and it has to do with kind of cultural assumptions regarding the role of women in the ancient world. In reality, she was probably a merchant. She probably just sold stuff, shipped stuff, but because so much of our imagination regarding women was that, well, women in the ancient world were either wives or prostitutes. This is kind of the way it goes. But what's remarkable about this story is that she offers hospitality to the two spies, which directly affects the outcome of what happens next. So, anyways, It was a great class, taught by Professor Diane Jacobson, who has done, I know she's done seminars out here before, but it's been maybe 20 years. I think she's retired now. I don't remember. Yeah. She was great. She was also my Hebrew teacher. She called me A+ Jesse. It was somewhat sarcastic. Because I took it as a J-term course, so it was a 4-week intensive I was like 6 to 8 hours a day of Hebrew for 4 weeks straight. Yeah. And it started at 8 in the morning, and I would always show up half awake for the first probably hour of class. And of course, one of the things that professors and teachers like to do is call on the person that seems to be marginally awake. And she would always do that, and I'd always have the right answer, and my friends they just hated me. They were like, how do you know that? I don't claim to be extra intelligent or anything, but Hebrew clicked for me for whatever reason. All right, let's talk about communion. So was it last week? Yeah, last week we kind of wrapped up-ish talking about baptism. I was going to print off Luther's Small Catechism for you today, and I forgot to do it. So we'll save that for next week. I'll bring in the excerpt from Luther's Small Catechism on the sacrament of the altar. But today I want to give a little bit of a refresher on kind of like the historical setting of communion, and then we're going to talk about similar things, our experience of it, the importance of it. A couple of important pieces. I brought this up. Actually, I'm going to hold on to that. I'm not going to get there yet. Okay. So where does the practice of communion originate from? Any thoughts, guesses? Scripture passages. Last Supper. Yeah, absolutely. That is effectively the origin story of the Eucharist. Well, so here's the thing. Here's the thing, right? Has anybody participated in a Seder service? Yes. What's that like? Yes.
And it incorporates the meal, and then during the course of the meal, there are sayings and passages.
Yes. Yep. That correspond to the Passover narrative, right? And I think Kurt maybe brought this up, I remember, 3 weeks ago, which is with both baptism and communion, we cannot forget the connection between whatever meal Jesus was having with his disciples and all of the meal practices that are incorporated into the Jewish religion. Because by and large, this is kind of a human thing, right? So when we celebrate a graduation, what do? You have a barbecue or a cookout, right? Because at least for me, it was always in June, right? So in Michigan, that means it's just starting to get warm and humid. Although nowadays, who knows what the weather's going to be like. And so for my graduation, and my brother's as well too, we rented a tent from our neighbor Joe Hall, who owned a septic pumping business, porta potties, and event tents. He was one of the few wealthy men in our neighborhood. So we rented a tent. The local volunteer firefighters would do what they called firefighter chicken, and so we booked the firefighters to come and do chicken for my graduation, and then we had a bunch of sides and stuff like that. But a lot of the celebrations that we do, and not just celebrations, but memorials. Luann, as you well know, what do we do when we memorialize somebody, when we have a funeral? We gather around food. My friend Anna Marsh, who is her and her husband Ryan Higgins, are the two professors that I was referring to. And again, they're in High Point, North Carolina right now, teaching at that college. I just got done editing Anna's book, which she just sent me back the second revision, so I'm going to have to spend a little bit of time this week on that, which is on the topic of food and femininity in Scripture. And so this is one of the fun intersections, and why I'm excited to merge into hospitality in the spring is how food is the control or the agency that women have in the ancient world. And if you look through, like, the necromancer at Endor, or the widow at Zarephath, or any of these stories, especially in the King's narrative, you'll find that food is the way that women do things. Think about the story of Ruth, right? The way that food plays into that narrative as well too. So, it's more the collecting of grain, but same idea. So, food is a human thing, right? We use food as the center of our celebrations. But more than that, food is one of the ways that we make peace, right? we offer hospitality. We offer food to somebody. We say, hey, I know we don't get along. Let's sit down over a cup of coffee or a meal or whatever. If you think about it, and kind of catalog all the ways in which you gather with people, friends or whatever, I could argue that probably 99% of your gatherings are around a meal or a drink of some sort, right? Yeah, please, absolutely.
My sorority had worked yesterday out and beautified our island out there.
Pat yourself on the back. Absolutely. Thank you, Linda, for the beautification.
Our service project or our socials around, okay, we're going to do this. What are we going to eat afterwards?
Yeah. Right? Because if you're going to do the work, you better get something to eat.
Yeah.
That.
We just did work and then, you know how heads get together.
Yeah. One of the most traumatizing days of my life, which was, and I've told this story multiple times, I think, was the day in which I baled hay for the first time, not knowing how to stack hay on a trailer, and just killed myself, right? The thing I remember second most to the suffering was the meal that Jim and Delynn prepared for me after I got done, and how, I don't know if I tasted the food, but I remember just how much my body was like, you need calories, my friend. You have done too much. Yeah, I did inhale, and it was delicious. But yeah, I mean, after an activity, we have food. After a memorial, we have food. When we gather with our friends and our family, we have food. And again, we'll talk about this when we talk about hospitality.
Growing up, when someone new moved into the neighborhood,
What did you do? You brought.
bought them a cake or something.
Yep. And to this day, this is one of the things that I again, I'll pat myself on my back. The fact that I cook a lot for me has been a gift, because it's one of the ways that I can share, what I do with people and family and friends and stuff like that. So I do enjoy it, absolutely. So we were down in Arizona this week. It was 105 degrees. It actually worked out really great. We played pickleball in the mornings, and then my brother and his family and my dad would go swimming in the pool in the afternoon, and Len and I went and saw museums. So it worked out well for all of us. We got out of the house, but anyways, I cooked every night. I made various forms of tacos and hamburgers, and nothing complicated, but they thankfully had a nice grill that I could cook on. But for me, that was one of the ways in which we could gather around. We didn't have to find a restaurant or anything like that. I would guess, or I would imagine, I would assume that if you think back over the course of your lifetimes, there are probably meals that are memorable to you, and it's probably as much the people that you had that meal with as much the food that you ate. So I don't want to belabor this point, but I also don't want to minimize the importance of the idea that one of the core practices of our community, our communal faith, is around a meal. And I also don't want to minimize the fact that when we look at our worship service, which is organized like thus. Gathering, word, meal, sending. That's the order of every worship service that we do. Sundays at least. This is essentially central to the worship service. This is, by the way, one of my big griefs. I shouldn't put it that way. I think this is very important, and maybe this is my latent Catholicism peeking out through, because for those of you that have been raised in the Catholic tradition, you can't have a Mass without a Mass, right? A Mass is the Eucharist. whether the priest preaches or not. The underlying thing that makes it a worship service is the Eucharist. Whether you're getting married or whether you're having a funeral, right? Whether somebody's being baptized, there's the meal, right? It's central to that practice. Go ahead.
I come to church at this time for the sermon and the communion.
Yeah.
And I don't know that the Bible says you should come for the speech. You have to come and have the communion.
So this is and we'll talk about this next week a little bit more when we get into Luther's Small Catechism. The emphasis on preaching that Lutheranism carries was Luther's big thing. He was really a big guy on the proclamation of the word. That being said, he was also really big on the sacrament of the altar as well too. But this is just as by way of explanation. This is one of the reasons that you don't get as much of an emphasis on the sermon in Catholic worship. Although I think it's changing because everything adapts to everything else. But historically speaking, this is why Lutheranism over and above against Catholic worship places a greater emphasis on preaching, theological stuff. So meal being central to our worship practice. This is one of my beefs with worship when it becomes. And I don't want to pick on any one tradition, but I have dipped my toes into the more non-denominational world, evangelical world, over the course of my lifetime. I dated a girl whose family was kind of in that world, which is one of the reasons we didn't work out in the long run, but that's a different story. And one of the things that was remarkable to me was I think I went to one service once where there was communion, but it was really almost an afterthought. It was kind of like, oh, by the way, we're going to do this. If anybody wants it, it's up here. And again, I might be mischaracterizing it. That was the way that it worked out in my memory. But by and large, what I remember significantly was that the final thing that happened in the worship service was this. And it wasn't scripture, it was the pastor speaking. So generally, when the service would close, is the pastor would get done with whatever appeal it was usually he was making, which sometimes was about money, sometimes it was an altar call, whatever it was. And then, it was tip your server at the door and see you later. I'm being a little bit snarky, but that was the vibe I got. So for me, this is one of the big reasons why I'm Lutheran, is that I think this is the center of our worship service. And I like that I don't get the last word, right? I preach, I proclaim the gospel to the best of my ability, and then we immediately transition into why we're all gathered here, which is around the meal.
Right.
Yeah.
So with that being said,
Yeah.
2 questions.
Yes.
One, how come the meals change from a full meal
Yeah.
to a symbol?
Yeah.
And then how come that symbol has changed from once a year to maybe once a month to now it's currently it's every Sunday? Why is that? I mean, why did that happen? If it's that important, why did it change in the
Yep.
Lutheran faith?
Good question. Taking your questions in order. Well, number one, it's ritual. We've ritualized the meal in a great way, for better or worse, right? Ritual is good when it points to or proclaims an idea, a concept, a theology that's central to us, right? Which theoretically, is what's happening here. In early Christian practice, the operative question here is what did the meal look like in that early Christian practice? So this is the form that we've talked about where they would gather for study. There would be a break, an intermission, and then those who weren't baptized would leave, and then those who were baptized would gather for the meal. The question that operates in my brain is, what did that look like? How in other words, how is it written? So likely not. So how did that gather? Also, keep in mind that it probably was a mirroring of Seder or other Jewish meals. So it was something that was incorporated from tradition into this new practice that was becoming something new. So did they do ritual stuff where there was some kind of sacrificial bread, also known as the bread of presence? So I think I talked about this 3 weeks ago. Again, nothing comes out of a vacuum. In the temple, there was a table outside of the Holy of Holies, outside of the curtain there, on which the bread of presence sat, which takes you all the way back to Exodus, Leviticus, which is the bread of presence is a calling back to the deliverance of manna to the people, signifying the presence of God in that space. Right? It is the divine pacifier. It is telling people that don't worry, God's still with you. So that bread sat there as kind of the signifier of that, which is a concept that gets pulled into our understanding of sacraments, communion as well, too, right? God is present in, through, and under the bread and the wine, to quote back to my seminary days.
Well, I probably go to this maybe years ago because it's been years, and I went to a church service that was being held in the school, and they had communion, and I was so distressed by it. I'll always remember it. On the side, they had a table, and there was a tray, and it had like Ritz crackers on it, some of which were broken, and there wasn't any time during the service when you were supposed to go and eat. If you wanted to, you just picked up and walked over and took it. And I thought there was no respect for that at all.
From our perspective, right? I mean, even within mainline Protestantism, there is a broad spectrum of communion practices. So, in Presbyterian practice, more Calvinistic, you get a de-emphasizing of the meal. And again, I don't necessarily want to get into those different sacramental theologies, but it's more of a memorial or a remembrance in Presbyterian theology. This is one of the things that, again, me being raised in a very 100% Norwegian Lutheran setting, I've had to experience over time. And one of the things I forget about is that, especially with as close relationships as I have with our ecumenical partners, Katie Pate at Milwaukee Presbyterian, and then Rebecca, who used to be at St. John's. I haven't met Jeannie, the new lady yet, but she sounds awesome. Is I forget that there are differences between our mainline Protestant traditions in our practice and our worship, and that usually came up for us pre-COVID. I don't know if you remember, we used to do Thanksgiving services together, and then Good Friday, right? And it was always funny to me because I would walk in and I'd be like, we're all on the same page, right? We all know how this is supposed to go. And they're like, nope, no, Jesse, we actually do different things in different churches. It's like, okay, and then but that was the fun part about it is the different things that were important or emphasized in practice. But yeah, it's and again, I already kind of gave my opinion on the importance of this, but one of the things I'm always curious about is why. Asking people why is that order or why is that thing important to you or not, and then at the same time being able to articulate the why for me. Why this is so important to me around here, and I've got a lot of personal baggage in a good way surrounding this as well too. When I was ordained, we had a whole Polish Catholic contingent that was at my ordination because it was a family that we were friends with because I played baseball with the kids. And they came to my ordination, which Catholics at a Lutheran ordination I thought was pretty great. But there was a couple there who they had both been divorced and they remarried, and they hadn't had communion for 20 years. And my ordination was the first time they were able to receive communion. And I'm stressed to the gills because I'm like, the bishop's here, and there's all these people that are here for this, for me, and here comes Mike and Peggy, and they're just bawling, and I'm like, I don't know what I said. I didn't preach, so all right. I'm thinking, did I screw up the words of institution? And then they said to me after, this is the first time we've had communion. I was like, oh crap, and that is part of my tapestry of meaning that I carry with me in this. What were we talking? What was I talking about? I got lost my train of thought. Yeah, go, Mike.
Has anybody been to the combination Lutheran Catholic Church here in Portland?
Spirit of Grace, formerly. What was it before it was Spirit of Grace? It's Bishop Laurie's former church.
Well, we went there, I think it was a Christmas service when we were still living in Montana, Kennewick Mountain. We went there, but I thought it was interesting. Everybody was all together, but they split up when communion happened.
Yes. Here's the cool thing about this, is that basically they received an exemption from the diocese to be able to do that. And they have been doing it for decades. I can't remember when Spirit of Grace, and again, what was they changed it. Anyways, when that congregation originally formed, it's a long story. You have to have Bishop Laurie tell you the story sometime. But they effectively received an exemption from the diocese in order for them to preside over communion in a co-Lutheran and Catholic space. One of the things that the current bishop has waffled on, to use soft language. But that, it's one of those things where maybe from an external perspective that seems divisive, but in fact, the amount of barriers that we are crossing in order for that to happen is really profound. And it has been one of the few sources of hope for, Catholic Lutheran relationships, although it's looking good. The last two popes have helped in that regard as well too. But, that would be one of the things that would bring joy to my life, would be able to see some kind of communion agreement between the Catholic and Lutheran churches in our lifetime, which will probably never happen, but
My cousins live in a small town in Texas, and there's a square, and on this side of the square is a Lutheran church, on this side of the square is a Catholic church.
yeah.
And my cousins were raised Catholic, but they all attended Lutheran also.
See, this is one of the Venn diagram things where if you're Catholic, you can absolutely take communion in a Lutheran church. Yeah. Then it depends on the Catholic church. Yeah.
My uncle died who was Catholic,
Yeah.
and that's why they had to raise the children in the Catholic church at that time. During his funeral, they asked the Lutheran minister, who was very well acquainted with the family,
Yeah.
to give a eulogy.
Yeah.
And when the eulogy was over with, the Lutheran minister wouldn't go sit down, and the priest said, "Where are you going?" And he said, "Well, I'm finished." He said, "No, you're going to help me with communion."
That's pretty cool. Pretty cool. Susan. Yeah. What do you think about that, Susan? I don't know. This is one of those things where I have the privilege of having the unique perspective of seeing the service in its entirety. I've got the 10,000-foot view, and so everything makes sense in that regard. It's one of the things that I think about a lot, which is, when we pass the plate, what's going on in the brains of guests and visitors and people that aren't familiar with that, because it feels like how many different analog experiences are there in modern culture of people asking for money, type things, and how, unfortunately. Here's one of the things that I would encourage people to pay attention to today. I mean, today is not any different than any other Sunday. But what do we do with the plate once it's been passed and brought to the back? September and MJ, and or Alice, and or Amelia, and or all four of them bring forward the plates, swerving up the aisle as they do so, running as fast as they can until they remember they're supposed to be respectful. And then somebody, it was Andy last week, comes down to get the plates, because it was Amelia was bringing the plate forward. I remember it. Or no, it was Alice, because she gave you, or it was Alice and Amelia, she gave you, yeah, anyways. And, whoever our communion assistants are, come down and receive the plate. They bring it up. Andy usually genuflects at the altar. And then what do we do with the plate? Set it on the altar. And then what do? I pray the offering prayer, the offertory prayer, which is a co-celebration of the gifts that we have brought forward and the gifts that we are about to receive, right? So pay attention to the offertory prayer, because it is drawing together this concept of the gift, right? So in other words, what we're effectively saying is we're saying, we are bringing forward the gifts that you have given us, O God. Thank you for the gifts that we are about to receive. And okay, here's a fun word, right? So I think I mentioned this last week. What do we refer to? What's the fancy word that we sometimes use to refer to the bread? Host. Host is from the Latin hostia, which means sacrifice. Sacrifice. So, and we can talk about sacrifice, but we'll come back to that because I want to do a little bit of a word study right now. Okay. So, well, quickly, we'll come back to sacrifice. But so it's the sacrifice that we're making, right? Here is our offering, and it's the sacrifice that has been made, and it's D, all of the above, right? Okay. So, what does this word mean? Yes. Comes from the Greek Eucharisto, which means thanks or thanksgiving. What does that mean? What meaning does that carry for you in talking about the sacrament of the table? There's no right answers. I'm
Lord, thank you, God, for giving us Jesus to save us.
absolutely. Yeah. Yes. And that's one aspect of it. Again, no right answers. What do you think? What else might we be giving thanks for in that moment? Yeah. Yeah. Again, no right or wrong answers here. Sacrifice, presence, relationship, grace has an R in it. I'm just going to do grace, forgiveness, right? Although those aren't the same thing, but I'm doing big categories here for now. What else are we giving thanks for in the Eucharist? Love, yes. Life, happiness, family, meal. What is Luther's explanation of daily bread in the Small Catechism? Everything. What is daily bread? When we say, give us today our daily bread, which we pray during communion, it's life, family, happiness, house, home, D, all of the above, right? So what are we giving thanks for? It's daily bread. It's the big category. Anything else? Any other ideas? Okay, we'll come back to this. What about this word? Any guesses as to when we start calling it communion? This is not a trick question, but it is kind of a trick question. This is Luther. This is Protestant Reformation introduces the language of communion. Yes, that is definitely a root. Specifically, it comes from the Latin communio. Yeah, yes, it means in common. It means in common. Which this is something this is a whole other class. Is talking about the concept of in communio, right? In communion, communion with. What does it mean to be in communion with somebody or in communio with somebody? Yeah, in sainthood. I like that. I see you. Yeah. Yes, that's important today. Paul, go ahead.
Well, once again, marriage has been desacralized in our culture to a large extent, but this is about the marriage of God with humanity and our marriage with each other. In other words, the love of God and the love of neighbor is central to everything you're doing here. The great commands are Sometimes I almost, I almost joke.
Yeah.
I realize, for instance, in the beginning of the service when we pass the peace, it's not, hey, how you doing? It's, the passing of the peace is to say, I hope that you have enough of everything, and if you don't, call me, and I will be there for you. And we commit ourselves to doing that to everyone on the planet, and that's the command. That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
So and dramatize is the wrong word here, because with the Greek idea of drama is much more important here, which is to say, we enter into our deepest reality. The deepest reality of who we are is here now, and this is what we are set to do in the world. We don't do it with our power. We do it with this power that comes to us in this moment, in this year. And well, I know that we're so far from realizing that that's no different than any other sin of ours.
Mm-hmm.
We're re-imaged in the image of God, and given eyes to see that everybody else is also in the image of God. And this is our only hope. Our hope is not
Yeah.
the economy that we're in, and all that stuff. Although that's very important as daily bread, but it is the past and it is the future all coming together in one. It's the commingling of it's a timeless thing. It's a very mystical thing that we're very uncomfortable with and don't know how to celebrate in many ways. But if you read Eucharistic theology through the ages, this is clear that this is to be the transforming of your life. Again, this is the transfiguration every time you eat this. And we dare not. Well, look at the great scandal of Corinthians. The great scandal of Corinthians around the Eucharist is that people don't share it as if we were equals.
Yeah.
And so it is the great equalizer of every human life and the importance of every human life. And it's just hard for us to grab this or to be transformed by this the way it's meant to be. But it's not a light thing at all. It's the center of God, putting the ring on our finger again, and God loving us again, honeymooning with us again.
Mm-hmm.
It's not something that we can take in without a great deal of immersion in it. And I like what Thich Nhat
Thich Nhat Hanh.
said. He said, for him, the best part of Christianity, he went to lots of Christian masses. He said the best part of Christianity is when you shut up and you focus on that bread.
which
You shut your mind down and let the bread feed you like a baby. And there again, if a Buddhist can get it, I might be able to get it.
amen to that. Which also, as a tangential word of thanksgiving, I just want to celebrate how many times people ask us for our bread recipe at the end of communion. So thank you, Brenda, for introducing that into our midst. It's easy for me to focus on the bread.
If people think about this, but
Yeah.
our bread is made by a few women.
Human hands. Yeah.
And to me, it is this. It's a really important part that to me that the most important thing that happens to me on Sunday is delivered through these female hands.
Yeah.
And because we still live in a culture where femininity is not understood.
Well, this is a great opportunity for me to what do you? It's not a segue. It's a reset. re-advertise that our next topic of study is going to be hospitality and the ways in which femininity has factored into meal providing. So we are connected to our ancient traditions through our bread practices here at Milwaukee Lutheran in a way that I think a lot of people will never understand or appreciate, which has its, yeah.
Often have used, but forget that the prayer as the grains of wheat when scattered on the hill.
As the grains of wheat. I was just singing now the feast and celebration in my head, yeah.
Understanding there is that us city folks are intimately attached to the soil, to farming, to wheat, to
Yeah.
fertilizer, to dung.
Whether we realize it or not. Yeah.
And yet we, again, in our modern view of life, and again, with increased digitalization,
Oh, yeah.
we are separated from our earthliness, and the fact that we are Adamah, right? We are
Yeah.
earthlings.
Which I have to share. My wife had a revelation this week. So I mentioned that we went we went to museums in the afternoon. So we saw not Andrew Lloyd, Frank Lloyd Wright. We saw Frank Lloyd Wright. Talliers and West. Has anybody been to Talliers and West? Yeah, it's pretty cool. We went to the Botanical Gardens. We went to the Heard Museum. Really great experience. We were at the Botanical Gardens, and one of the neat things they have there, because garden is a completely different interpretation of that word in that setting, because it's all saguaros and cacti and yucca and all of these desert plants that in the Pacific Northwest we have no concept of, right? Botanical Garden, when I think of that, I think of Victoria, British Columbia, the Botanical Gardens there. It's a very different setting, but it's very neat. One of the things that absolutely blew my wife's mind was how many things the native peoples could make out of these few plants, right? And the number of things that saguaro and yucca were used for in terms of food, shelter, weaving, all of the above. Tequila as well too. Well, it's interesting because there was a piece they were talking about with the booming popularity of tequila. It's actually creating a bit of an environmental crisis in that agave is not necessarily a super domesticable crop, and it's not. And again, it creates the same problem we run into with a lot of things, which is creating a monoculture of plants in and over in an area which is not necessarily conducive to that kind of farming. Anyways, but it's you talk about the disconnect from how this connects us not just to each other, not just to the divine, but to the essence of creation itself as well too. I mean, again, the idea as the grains of wheat, the idea that the bread that our women are making, whether it's flour that you bought from Bob's Red Mill or whatever, but that came from a plant which came from the earth, which came from the soil, which had water from our skies, and ties into the creation. One of the things that I enjoyed the desert. I absolutely detest the Phoenix Scottsdale area, and it's not a moral judgment on anybody, but just it's very aesthetic. Yeah, aesthetic. Is that the word? Anesthetic. Yeah, where you go. Everything's brown. Everything's flat.
Buildings.
Yeah, everything is cement, and you go from conditioned environment to conditioned environment to conditioned environment, and grocery shopping was such a weird experience. I'm like, we are, I don't know what, 60 miles, 100 miles from the Mexican border, and all the food was like hardcore white people food. Like I was expecting to walk into Albertsons and have access to an array of things from the southwest of the United States, and it's not. It's all food that you have in Michigan because because it's all people that retired and moved to Arizona, and I was like, do you know where you are? Anyways, okay. Let's talk. I want to talk about this word, mass. We kind of glossed over this at the beginning, and again, it's not a word that we use in our language so much, mainly because we have this word. But mass comes from the Latin missa, which you might hear as mission, because mass is effectively the phrase go. This phrase, ite missa est, go, it is sent. So Paul brought that up, which is, again, one of the really important parts of communion. I erased my order of service, but is the idea that the meal is at the end for us is because we have been fed, therefore we go. We have been fed, we go. We've been fed, we go. Just like, we were talking about, okay, eat a hearty breakfast, then go bale hay all day, right? It's the same concept of we are being sustained through these vital ingredients that come from our earth and our soil, which God has created. This is the daily bread that has been given to us. We have been loved. We have been in the presence of the divine. We have known the relationship. We have received forgiveness and heard grace. And now, get the heck out of here. Get the heck out of here. Bring it. So, early Christian church, right? This is one of the things that we have a bit of a ritual disconnect from. Early church, as soon as they ate the meal, what did they do? They gathered food and took it to the widows. So, I mean, that was it. They closed the worship service, sang their last song or whatever they did together, and then immediately everybody from the community went and brought food to everybody else. Those that couldn't make it, those that were hungry, the widow, the orphan, the foreigner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That is one of the things that I love to bring back into our practices, because, so let's think about this. What are the ways in which our community feeds? Kathy, I'm looking at you. Backpack buddies, right? So we bring backpacks of food to kids. Sorry, Kathy. Your mouth was moving. I think I caught her out of a reverie. Sorry, Kathy. I didn't mean to call on you like we were in school. Yeah. We have our pantry at Round Middle School, which is about more than just food, but that is part of it as well too. And it's not, again, what is daily bread? It's not just food, it's everything. So it is the quilts that we make, right? It is, well, obviously we have our blessing boxes out there. One of the things that I think I could be better at, we could be better at, is connecting this to that, right? Is that we've been fed, now therefore we go feed. Ite missa est, go, it is sent, right? Get out of here, now share that food with everybody else. And the neat thing about that is how much that connects us to the original practices of our burgeoning, becoming faith, And Christians didn't invent this as well too. Again, this is tied into the idea of hospitality, the idea of meal. A quick question, for those of you that have been married at least once, what were the meals that you shared? Do you remember what your wedding feast was? I hear Mike and Brenda laughing. Was it that good or that bad?
We didn't get to eat our wedding cake. Well, we were just busy talking to people.
Amen, brother. I know we had a cake. I know I got a piece of it. We also had a tower of macarons because that's what you do. Yeah, and I remember my wife had very strong opinions about the food because she wanted. So, two quick stories. We had two weddings. We had our wedding, and then we had our French wedding, which was just a meal, which was Alain's dad organized a meal at a restaurant up in Saint-Dié-des-Vosges, which is a little French town up in the Vosges Mountains up in northeast France. I was not prepared. They talked about it like it was a luncheon. It started at like 2 p.m., which I was like, what the heck starts at 2 p.m., right? It's not lunch, it's not dinner. It was all day. So we got there at like 12:30, something like that. And there were at least 6 courses. Langoustine, there was a beef tenderloin in a puff pastry cage. I mean, there was some of the best food I've ever eaten, and it was just kind of like a ho-hum restaurant in rural northeast France, but it's pretty cool. And yeah, exactly, a 3-star rural restaurant. And it really sank into me just kind of how much the meal is central to this concept. And for us, marriages are so often about the pageantry, right? The procession, the music, the different metaphors of the ways that we try to represent unity, mixing sand, lighting candles, whatever. In the ancient world, it was all about this, and it still is, right? In parts of the world. If you go to Southeast Asia, there's a ceremony, and then there's 3 days of partying, right? Kurt.
That is the other thing that I guess we miss too, and I've heard that you have to be careful in evangelicalism because we also like to do that thing where we try to mix it with sort of, you met people that sort of keep Orthodox Jewish tradition and mingle.
Oh yeah.
And then you get in this sort of
Cultural appropriation.
people that
Yes.
and sort of great understanding for me as an evangelical where we celebrated it on Easter and maybe once a month, and moving away from these ritualistic, or as they would call it, the ritual. We don't want it to become something special. And really, we don't want to take 15 minutes away from what the guy's talking about.
Yeah.
But the bigger thing is, the importance is, in evangelicalism, it has been moving more towards the worship spectrum and the sort of siloing of, it's become more about our gift to God and less about
Yeah.
his gift to us.
The sacrifice in that direction. Yeah.
For a lot of us, it is about rewriting and recentering it.
Sure.
In this sort of more traditional, it's not a ritual, it's a command. And
Yes.
the definition means
Do this in remembrance of
so
me.
I
Yeah.
would say for you guys, as you've seen it move, it's not moved more toward ritual, it's moved in alignment, in obedience with the command, I would say.
Thank you. We'll pat ourselves on the back. No. That's no. And again, thank you very much, and we'll pat ourselves on the back for that. But also, well, it's like what I was talking about earlier. There's a temptation to always think that the way that you do it is the way to do it. And as much as I celebrate what we do, one of the greatest joys of my life in this work has been experiencing the diversity of the meaning of the things that are important to me, whether it's communion or baptism or whatever, and hearing from other people in that regard as well too. Again, I'll use my example that comes to mind. Pastor Katie Pate and I, we go on walks once a month. We've got one coming up this Tuesday, and we talk about. And one of the things that I always forget is that she's Presbyterian, and her world is different in that regard. And one of the big ways in which it's different is the structure of her church. Is they have a lot of committees. They have a lot of committees, but it's great. It's great because Pastor Katie has a finance committee and a building committee and a youth committee, and in order for the church to exist, they have to have those committees, right? And the presbyters have to be in charge. And then one of the things that we inevitably end up talking about is the little idiosyncrasies of our worship services that inevitably become stress points for us. And it's different. It's different. And it's different because of the things that we place emphasis on. For me, oftentimes the things that, and I shouldn't say stress points, but the things that I end up spending a lot of time around are music, conversations around that. Luckily, I don't know that we've had that many conflicts over the meal, but it hasn't been that long since our church almost tore itself apart over questions like that. Not this church, but around the age at which you can participate in the meal. Do you need to have First Communion? Is it okay? Can you do it every week, or is it only twice a month? Anyways, I'm kind of rambling off topic, but I think it's very important for us to hear perspectives beyond our own, and yours is a perspective that we in this room don't get too much. So
So is it basically each church chooses how they want to and how often they want to serve communion?
in a Presbyterian church,
No, in our
ish. Again, this is a totally different conversation because this is around the concept of right worship and tradition and practice.
Well, I can remember when we did every Sunday here, and I was thinking at the time because we didn't have people to do it every.
Yeah, it takes a village, right? As the women who do a lot of our cleanup and setup on Sundays, there is bread to be baked, there is wine to be poured, there are linens to be washed, there are candles to be lit, there are all kinds of things that have to happen. For a baptism, we've got our beautiful baptismal napkins that have been knit or embroidered. That's the word I'm looking for. That have been embroidered. We've got our candles. We've got our baptismal certificates. We've got our quilts that have been made. I think one of the things that especially as our general population ages, one of the things that is going to be tough for a lot of churches, ours included, going forward, is that the roles that we have taken for granted for the past 100 years are just not going to have people to do them. And we're watching this happen right now. Poor Luann has done, I don't remember how many memorial services. We were talking about this last week. And we're having the conversation that perhaps we just don't do it anymore. For members here that passed away, we'll rally the team, but otherwise, bring in a caterer. And that's a grief in some regards. On the other hand, that's reality. And thank God for the caterers. Amen. Yeah.
It's kind of funny having been on the church council for the last 4 years.
Has it been that long?
How much? Yeah. July I'm done. But it's how much. It's interesting how much stuff that gets done around here without anybody even asking it be done. And
Right.
it's kind of like people just sort of take on different responsibilities. And one of the things we've done is I've tried to put together the spreadsheet of all the different things we're doing and who does it. And it's really almost impossible to track all that stuff, that you're talking about, like preparing for communion. And I don't know, if you haven't been on the church council, you gotta give it a run. It's been one of the most interesting things I've done, is just to look at all the moving parts that it takes to make this church come together.
Yeah.
And how many different people just do stuff
I know.
without even being asked.
I know. There's one of my this. I guess this is Schadenfreude, but one of the things that I take great joy from in life is watching people, usually younger people, trying to do something that their elders have done for a long time, and kind of how we take it for granted. In Fort Wayne, I was part of a congregation that was a mission congregation. We were a congregation becoming a congregation, and so it's always this tension of like the identity of that community. In a lot of ways, was a reaction to the ways in which church had wounded people, and so we were trying to leave behind some of the things that bring up that dark stuff. But then also, inevitably, you're still going to be church, right? So even though people would call our service contemporary, which whatever. We still followed that same order of service, gathering, worship, or word, meal, sending, all that jazz. But the number of things where we had to essentially reinvent the wheel which we didn't need to. We didn't need to. There's been people doing these things for years and years and years and years. And communion bread was one of those and this wasn't, I had nothing to do with this. This was something that happened while I was there. They had just bought bread from the equivalent of Franz's Bakery in Fort Wayne. It wasn't Franz's, it was something else. But there was a really relatively good bakery. And of course, at some point, somebody comes up with a great idea of like, I think we should make it. Who's going to make it? Right? This is the funny thing and this describes so many church things. Somebody had this great idea. I think we should have bread that we make. And that we is doing a lot of heavy lifting, right? That we make. And it's like, who's the we? Are you volunteering to make bread every Sunday? If you are, great. What about when you're gone? What do we do? And so it took us a good year and a half to incorporate that into our worship life. And Mark and I essentially had to be on call to pick up bread from Franz's Bakery just in case somebody had forgotten or whatever happened. Anyways, I did. So we are going to talk about this next week. I just want to share a real, so talking about marriage feast. So my parents got married in 1980, and my mom's family, my grandpa Henry and grandma Lois, who are still alive, I'm going to see them in August. That's their 70th anniversary this year. No. Oh, shoot. 75th anniversary this year. Because my Uncle Dan he coordinated all of us to put together memories for them and stuff like that. And they're celebrating it on Easter this year. So that's pretty cool. Which I won't be able to be there for that. I've got work. That's okay. So my grandma and grandpa, Stark, who grew up or lived in Wisconsin, and then my grandma and grandpa Christofferson, who are Norwegian to the bone in Northeast Michigan, immigrant family. So I've got German and Hungarian. My grandpa's Hungarian, my grandma's German, and then Norwegian on one side. My mom's family was very successful. It's about as successful as you can be at farmers, wherein my grandpa started with 40 milk cows and did that until he decided he was sick of milking cows, and he was a rep for Pioneer Seed, and then my grandpa was a fascinating guy, and sold insurance, did a bunch of stuff. Ended up getting into the stock market in the 80s and did well with that, to the point where when we were growing up, it was obvious that there was a financial disparity between the sides of the family. Not awful, but just we were aware of that. One of the consequences of that is that my dad, who effectively flunked out of college, got drafted, and then went to college 4 more times but never got a degree, and who was 11 years older than my mom, was marrying my mom, who was a graduate of St. Olaf University in St. Paul, Minnesota. Graduated with honors and was, an aspiring music teacher. When they got together, my mom's parents were, I wouldn't say less than enthused, but it took them a little bit to warm up to the idea. And one of the points of conflict around that was what they were going to do for a wedding. Of course, my mom's parents had big dreams for their daughter. It was going to be a big church wedding. They were part of a big church, which is still around in Berlin, Wisconsin. It was going to be at their church in Berlin. They were going to have all the pageantry, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And my dad is just like, well, some of you have met my dad. So what they ended up doing is they ended up getting married at the camp where I was born. Well, I was born at the hospital, but this is where I was raised at Waypost Camp in eastern Wisconsin, near Wausau. And what they ended up doing is they had it's not really an auntie-wedding, but my grandpa Christopherson, my grandpa Andy, cooked all the food, made all the wine, because he made wine in his basement, rhubarb wine and cherry wine and all kinds of other stuff. And then my parents did the dishes. At their own wedding. They cleaned all the plates. And one of the things that, I've had conversations about this with my dad and my mom before she passed, was how much that ended up meaning to them, because it was what we just talked about. It was communio. It was community. And their friends were there, their family was there, and it was a meal that was prepared from the earth that my grandparents tilled, and farmed. It was from the ingredients that they made. And just how much of a change that was. And so is one of the things that when we got married at this resort up in the mountain with food that was prepared by caterers, which ended up being an amazing wedding. I don't regret any of it. But kind of getting back to what we were talking about earlier is how much of communion, I think, is about grounding. In addition to all the other stuff that we talk about, forgiveness, all of these important ideas that are included in this, forgiveness, love, grace, all that jazz. How much of it is just getting our feet planted in the earth again, right? And how important that is in that concept of being sent out. I think sometimes we get up here too much. This is going to be one of the themes of the sermon today. We live in our heads, and we can live in our heads, we can live in our hearts, but I think there's a very great importance to having our feet just anchored in the earth as well too. I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about, but remembering that Ash Wednesday, where did we come from? We came from the dust. We came from the dust, and we're going to return to the dust. In the meantime, we give thanks for the life that has been breathed into us in this moment. So, all right, see you in worship. We're back next week for one final class on this. Then we take a break for Easter, and then we'll be back with hospitality following Easter. Sarah.
I was going to say, Spirit of Grace, former name is Atonement.
Atonement Lutheran. Thank you.
Leave all the tables and chairs up. We have a congregational meeting.
Yeah, if I didn't announce it.
And it's spring break.
And it's spring break, yep.